In the merciless desert heat, a little black girl and her black mama lay dying, abandoned like discarded trash, until a giant cowboy's shadow fell across them and his deep voice rumbled, "You're coming with me." The cruel townspeople had already written them off as thieves who got what they deserved, whispering that buzzards would clean up the mess by morning. Without mercy, the desert would claim two more forgotten souls. But this towering stranger saw something different, a spark of defiance in the trembling girl's eyes that reminded him of his own quest for justice in a lawless land. What he didn't know was that this child's extraordinary mind held secrets powerful enough to topple the very men who left her to die, and that saving her would force him to choose between his solitary existence and a fight that could destroy them both. Would their unlikely alliance expose a conspiracy that reaches the town's most trusted leaders, or would the truth die with them in the wasteland? The morning sun cast long shadows across the modest cabin where 9-year-old Sapphire Jenkins sat at a wooden table, her small fingers carefully sorting through papers. Her mother Ruby moved between the stove and the desk, checking arithmetic problems and spelling tests with the practiced eye of someone who had transformed from bondage to educator through sheer determination. Ruby had built something precious here in Millbrook Township. The schoolhouse buzzed with children of all backgrounds, learning letters and numbers that would carry them beyond the limitations others tried to impose. She kept meticulous records of every penny spent on books, slates, and supplies. Sapphire absorbed everything around her with unusual intensity. When other children forgot their lessons by evening, every word remained crystal clear in her mind. Her mother called it a gift from God, though it sometimes felt overwhelming when memories crowded together like too many voices in a small room. The sound of heavy boots on the cabin steps made Ruby freeze. Through the window, Sapphire saw Sheriff Clayton Murdoch approaching with 2 deputies. His weathered face carried the kind of authority that brooked no argument, and his hand rested casually on his gun belt. Ruby opened the door before he could knock. Murdoch removed his hat with exaggerated politeness. "Morning, Miss Ruby. Need to discuss some irregularities in your school funding." Ruby's spine straightened. "What kind of irregularities?" Murdoch pushed past her into the cabin. His eyes swept over the neat stacks of records on Ruby's desk. "Territory sent word that money meant for the native treaty obligations somehow ended up in your school account. That's a serious accusation." Sapphire watched from her corner as her mother's jaw tightened. Ruby had shown her those very records just yesterday, explaining how the government allocated specific funds for native communities and separate money for the school. The numbers were clear and properly documented. "Those funds were designated for education from the start," Ruby said firmly. "Every transaction is recorded and accounted for." Murdoch's deputies flanked him as he moved toward the desk. "Problem is, the official records show something different. Says here you've been taking money meant for treaty payments and using it for your little school project." Ruby pulled out a ledger and opened it to pages filled with neat columns of figures. "These are the original allocation documents. The school funding came through proper channels." Sapphire's extraordinary memory kicked in automatically. She recalled every conversation her mother had shared about the funding sources, every document Ruby had explained to her, every official letter that had arrived. The sheriff's version didn't match what Sapphire had seen and heard. Murdoch glanced at the ledger dismissively. "Funny how your records don't match the territorial books. Makes a person wonder if someone's been doing some creative bookkeeping." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Ruby's face flushed with righteous anger, but Sapphire could see something else in her mother's expression. Fear. Not fear of the charges, but fear of what lay behind them. "I've stolen nothing," Ruby said quietly. "Every penny has been properly spent on the children's education." Murdoch's smile held no warmth. "Well now, that's going to be real hard to prove when the official records say otherwise. Territorial government takes theft of treaty money mighty seriously. Could be looking at serious jail time." One of the deputies stepped forward with papers. "Need you to sign this confession, stating you misappropriated funds intended for native communities. Make things easier for everyone. Sapphire watched her mother examine the document. Ruby's lips moved silently as she read, and her face grew pale. The paper clearly contained lies, but refusing to sign would mean fighting the territorial government's word against that of a former slave. I won't sign lies, Ruby said, setting the paper down. Murdoch's friendly facade evaporated. That's unfortunate, real unfortunate. Ruby moved protectively toward Sapphire. My daughter has nothing to do with this. Child's got eyes and ears, doesn't she? Probably seen all sorts of interesting things around here. Sapphire felt ice in her stomach as Murdoch's gaze settled on her. Her perfect memory suddenly felt less like a gift and more like a target painted on her back. We'll be back tomorrow for your answer, Murdoch said, replacing his hat. Think carefully about the consequences of being stubborn. After they left, Ruby gathered papers frantically. Her hands shook as she stuffed documents into a canvas bag. Mama, we have to leave, baby. Tonight. Sapphire helped pack their few belongings while Ruby buried the real financial records in a tin box behind the cabin. They moved through the darkness toward the hills, hoping to reach the next town before dawn. The deputies found them at sunrise. Ruby pushed Sapphire behind a boulder and faced the men with dignity intact despite the fear in her eyes. Last chance, Murdoch called out. Sign the confession or face the consequences. Ruby lifted her chin. I've done nothing wrong. The men dragged them to the desert's edge. Murdoch leaned close to Ruby's face. Maybe the sun will change your mind about cooperation. They left Ruby and Sapphire with no water, no shade, and no hope. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction. By midday, Ruby had collapsed. Sapphire held her mother's burning hand and watched buzzards circle overhead. The massive shadow fell across them when the sun reached its peak. Sapphire looked up to see a giant of a man mounted on a dark horse, his weathered face studying their situation with calculating eyes. Tobias Caldwell had seen enough injustice to recognize it at a glance. You're coming with me. Mountain Caldwell lifted Ruby onto his horse with surprising gentleness for a man of his size. Sapphire climbed up behind him, her small arms barely reaching around his massive frame. His hidden camp lay tucked between red rocks where a natural spring provided precious water. He worked in silence, cleaning Ruby's wounds and forcing water between her cracked lips. Sapphire watched every movement, cataloging details the way her mind automatically stored information. This stranger moved with the careful efficiency of someone accustomed to tending injuries. Ruby drifted in and out of consciousness for 2 days. During the long hours, Sapphire found herself talking to fill the oppressive quiet of the desert. She recited her lessons, the way her mother had taught her to organize her thoughts when memories threatened to overwhelm her. Sheriff Murdoch arrived at precisely 8:37 on Tuesday morning, she said, watching Mountain tend the fire. He wore a silver watch chain and his left boot had a crack near the heel. His deputy carried papers with the territorial seal, but the ink was too fresh. Official documents aged differently. Mountain looked up from his work. Most children her age struggled to remember what they had for breakfast. You remember all that exactly. I remember everything exactly. The words carried weight beyond her years. Mountain had encountered many unusual people in his travels, but this child possessed something extraordinary. When Ruby finally regained full consciousness on the 3rd day, the pieces began forming a clearer picture. Ruby's voice came out as a whisper. Did they follow us? No one followed, Mountain said, but they left you both to die. That suggests they wanted something more than just your silence. Sapphire moved closer to her mother. Mama, I remember the papers Sheriff Murdoch showed you. The numbers were wrong. The allocation dates didn't match the documents you showed me last month. Ruby's eyes widened. Sometimes she forgot the scope of her daughter's abilities. Mountain poured water into a tin cup. What kind of papers? Ruby struggled to sit up. The territorial government allocates funds for treaty obligations with local tribes. Separate money comes for school operations. Someone's been stealing from both sources and needed a scapegoat. The real records show proper allocation, Sapphire added. But Sheriff Murdoch's papers claimed Mama took treaty money for school supplies. The handwriting analysis was wrong too. Official territorial documents use a specific clerk's script. These were forged. Mountain studied the child's serious face. In his years as a bounty hunter, he had learned to spot lies and half-truths. This girl spoke with the precision of someone recounting facts, not constructing stories. How do you know about handwriting analysis? Mama taught me. She learned to read official documents when she gained her freedom. Knowledge protects you when people try to cheat you. Ruby reached for her daughter's hand. Sapphire's memory developed after a fever when she was 5. The doctor said her brain compensated for the trauma by strengthening other areas. She remembers conversations word for word, every document she's seen, every face she's encountered. Mountain had witnessed corruption throughout his military service and bounty hunting career. Officers who sold supplies meant for soldiers, lawmen who pocketed reward money, politicians who promised justice while lining their own pockets. But this conspiracy carried deeper implications. If they're stealing treaty money, it affects more than just your school. Ruby nodded weakly. The local tribes depend on those funds for winter supplies and medical care. Without that money, people will suffer. Children will go hungry. Sapphire's young face hardened with determination. I can prove what really happened. Every conversation, every document, every detail is stored right here. She tapped her temple. Mountain made his decision. Years of chasing outlaws for money had left him empty. Here was a chance to fight for something meaningful. A child with an extraordinary gift, and a mother who had sacrificed everything for education, deserved better than exile and fear. We're not running, he said firmly. We're going back to expose the truth. Ruby tried to protest, but Mountain raised his hand. I've spent 15 years hunting men who prey on the innocent. Started when I saw military officers sell medical supplies while wounded soldiers died. Swore I'd never walk away from injustice again. He moved to his saddlebags and pulled out a collection of wanted posters and legal documents. Built a reputation for bringing in corrupt officials. Territorial judges know my work. Your testimony, backed by that memory of yours, could break this conspiracy wide open. Sapphire felt a surge of hope mixed with fear. Sheriff Murdoch won't just give up. He'll try to stop us. Let him try. I didn't survive 10 years of bounty hunting by backing down from bullies. Mountain began planning their return to Millbrook Township. They would need allies, evidence, and careful strategy. But first, they needed to understand the full scope of the conspiracy. Tell me everything you remember about the documents, he said to Sapphire. Every detail, no matter how small. For the next hour, Sapphire recited precise descriptions of papers, conversations, and transactions. Her memory painted a picture of systematic theft spanning months, possibly years. Money meant for native communities had been diverted through false documentation. School funds had been skimmed through inflated supply costs. Mountain realized they weren't just fighting Sheriff Murdoch. This operation required someone with access to territorial records and official seals, someone with enough authority to forge government documents convincingly. As the sun set over the desert, 3 unlikely allies prepared for a battle that would test everything they believed about justice, truth, and the power of courage in the face of overwhelming corruption. Mountain's network of contacts stretched across 3 territories. His first stop brought them to Deputy Maria Santos, a sharp-eyed woman who had noticed inconsistencies in Sheriff Murdoch's recent reports. She operated from a small office 2 towns over, handling disputes that crossed county lines. Santos studied the trio with professional skepticism until Sapphire began recounting specific details about forged documents. The child's precise memory impressed her, but the implications troubled her more. Murdoch's been filing reports about increased bandit activity, Santos said. Claims he's been chasing cattle rustlers and land grabbers. But the descriptions never match any known criminals. Sapphire closed her eyes and accessed her mental catalog. On September 14th, he reported chasing 3 men on spotted horses toward Eagle Creek. But I saw those same horses tied behind the bank that morning. The riders were wearing deputy badges. Santos pulled out a file folder. That matches the date when the Rawlings family lost their homestead claim. Bank foreclosed for unpaid taxes, but the family insists they made payments. The pattern began emerging. Families driven from their land. Treaty obligations mysteriously unfulfilled. School funding diverted through fraudulent claims. All of it covered by Sheriff Murdoch's reports about fictitious criminal activity. Mountain's second contact proved equally valuable. Mrs. Catherine Webb managed charitable funds for the town's prominent families. Her husband ran the bank, but Catherine handled the social obligations that kept their reputation spotless. She agreed to meet them at an abandoned church outside town limits. Catherine arrived in a simple wagon, her usual elegant attire replaced by a plain dress that wouldn't attract attention. Her worried expression suggested she had been expecting this conversation. "I've been documenting discrepancies for months," she admitted. "Donations meant for winter relief supplies never reach the native families. Money allocated for widow pensions disappears from the accounts. My husband claims the territorial government changed the procedures, but nothing feels right." Sapphire's memory provided the missing connections. She described overheard conversations about land sales to railroad companies, payments made through intermediary accounts, and officials who visited town under false pretenses. Each detail Catherine confirmed added another layer to the conspiracy. "The railroad wants a direct route through the valley," Catherine explained. "That means acquiring tribal lands and removing homesteaders who might complicate the surveys. Someone's been systematically clearing the path." Mountain realized the stakes extended far beyond stolen school money. This conspiracy involved forced displacement of entire communities, betrayal of federal treaties, and corporate manipulation of local government. Their investigation required careful movement. Murdoch's men patrolled the main roads, searching for the survivors they assumed had died in the desert. Mountain used his knowledge of wilderness trails to keep them hidden while they gathered evidence. During their third day of reconnaissance, they witnessed the conspiracy in action. From a rocky overlook, they watched Murdoch meet with strangers near the railroad survey markers. Money changed hands. Documents were exchanged. Plans were finalized for removing the last obstacles to railroad expansion. Sapphire memorized every face, every word she could hear, every detail of the transaction. Her extraordinary ability transformed her from a victim into the most dangerous witness the conspirators could imagine. Their close calls began that evening. Murdoch's patrol nearly discovered their camp when Ruby's cough echoed off the canyon walls. Mountain moved them deeper into the wilderness, but the net was tightening. The second near miss came when they approached town to gather supplies. Sapphire spotted the ambush before they walked into it. Her memory of terrain features, gained from childhood explorations with her mother, revealed the hiding spots where armed men waited. "3 men behind the grain store," she whispered. "2 more near the water trough. They're positioned to catch someone coming from the eastern trail." Mountain marveled at the child's tactical awareness. Most adults would have missed the subtle signs she noticed instinctively. They circled wide and approached from the opposite direction, but the experience drove home their vulnerability. Murdoch was hunting them with increasing desperation. The failed ambush suggested he knew they posed a serious threat to his operation. Ruby's condition remained fragile. The desert ordeal had taken a severe toll, and constant movement prevented proper recovery. She tried to hide her weakness, but Mountain could see the effort each day required. "We need to end this soon," he told Sapphire during one of Ruby's rest periods. "Your mother needs medical care and safety." Sapphire nodded with grim understanding. The conspiracy reaches higher than Sheriff Murdoch. Someone with real authority has to be coordinating the document forgeries and territorial communications. Mountain had reached the same conclusion. The operation's sophistication, required connections beyond local law enforcement. Someone with access to official seals and government records was orchestrating the entire scheme. During their final night in hiding, Mountain taught Sapphire the principles of strategic thinking he had learned during his military service. How to analyze enemy weaknesses, how to choose battlegrounds that favored defenders over attackers, how to use superior information to overcome superior force. Your memory is our greatest weapon, he explained. But weapons are only effective if used at the right time and place. Sapphire absorbed the lessons with the same intensity she applied to everything else. Her extraordinary mind was learning to think beyond mere storage and recall. She was developing the ability to synthesize information into actionable intelligence. As dawn approached, they prepared for the most dangerous phase of their mission. They would return to Millbrook Township not as fugitives, but as investigators ready to expose the truth. The evidence they had gathered painted a clear picture of systematic corruption, but presenting that evidence would require confronting the very people who had tried to kill them. The final piece of the puzzle awaited them in town, and with it, the revelation that would transform their understanding of who truly controlled the conspiracy that had cost them everything. Mountain's plan required splitting up to gather final evidence while avoiding Murdoch's increasingly frantic patrols. He would approach the railroad surveyors directly, posing as a potential land seller. Deputy Santos would investigate territorial records through official channels. Ruby and Sapphire would remain hidden at Catherine Webb's isolated cabin. The plan unraveled within hours. Catherine arrived at the cabin breathless and terrified. They took Ruby. Murdoch's men were waiting when she went to gather medicinal herbs near the creek. Sapphire felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Her mother had insisted on collecting the plants herself, claiming she needed to stay strong for what lay ahead. Now she was gone. Where did they take her? The church. Reverend Stone is holding a special prayer service tonight for the community's moral guidance. He claims Ruby will confess her sins publicly and ask for forgiveness. The name hit Sapphire like a physical blow. Reverend Ezekiel Stone commanded respect throughout the territory. His sermons drew crowds from neighboring towns. His moral authority was absolute and unquestioned. Mountain returned from his scouting mission to find Sapphire pacing the cabin like a caged animal. Catherine quickly explained the situation, while Sapphire's extraordinary memory began processing new information. Reverend Stone visited our school 3 times last month, Sapphire said, her voice tight with concentration. Each time, he asked detailed questions about funding sources and record keeping. He examined Mama's ledgers personally. Mountain's expression grew grim. What kind of questions? Specific ones. How territorial payments were processed, which officials signed allocation documents, whether Mama kept copies of original paperwork. The pattern crystallized with horrible clarity. Stone hadn't been making pastoral visits. He had been conducting intelligence gathering to identify potential threats to his operation. Catherine's face went pale. Ezekiel Stone has been our spiritual leader for 8 years. He married my husband and me. He baptized half the children in town. Everyone trusts him completely. Sapphire's memory provided more damning details. He always carried a leather satchel during his visits. I saw official territorial seals and blank government forms inside when he opened it. At the time, I thought he was delivering documents for Mama's educational programs. Mountain realized the full scope of their enemy. Stone possessed the moral authority to cover any crime, the community trust to deflect suspicion, and the official access to forge government documents convincingly. He was the perfect puppet master for a conspiracy requiring both criminal cunning and respectable camouflage. Murdoch is just the muscle, Mountain said grimly. Stone is the brain behind everything. Deputy Santos arrived as they were planning their response. Her investigation had uncovered disturbing connections between Stone's travels and suspicious activity across multiple territories. He's been visiting communities along the proposed railroad route for 2 years, she reported. Each visit coincides with land disputes, treaty violations, or unexplained population displacement. The pattern is too consistent to be coincidence. Sapphire closed her eyes and accessed her mental catalog of Stone's visits to their school. His questions hadn't been random pastoral interest. He had been systematically mapping their knowledge of financial procedures and identifying potential evidence that could expose his crimes. He knew exactly what documents to forge because Mama explained the proper procedures to him, she realized. He used her own knowledge against her. The betrayal cut deeper than the physical abandonment in the desert. Stone had violated their trust, exploited Ruby's dedication to education, and turned her own honesty into a weapon against her. A messenger arrived as evening approached. Stone demanded that Mountain and Sapphire present themselves at the church before the Sunday service began. Ruby's safety depended on their compliance. He wants to end this publicly, Mountain analyzed. Force confessions during the service when the entire community is watching. Use his moral authority to destroy our credibility permanently. Sapphire's young face hardened with determination beyond her years. Then we give him exactly what he wants, a public confrontation. Mountain started to protest, but Sapphire cut him off. My memory contains every detail of his crimes, every forged document, every stolen payment, every lie he's constructed. He thinks his reputation will protect him, but truth is stronger than reputation. Catherine Webb stepped forward with unexpected resolve. The whole community will be there. If you can prove Stone's corruption in front of everyone, his authority collapses instantly. Deputy Santos nodded agreement. I can have territorial authorities standing by. Once his crimes are exposed publicly, they'll have to act. Mountain weighed the risks against the alternatives. Running would leave Ruby in Stone's hands and allow the conspiracy to continue destroying innocent lives. Fighting Stone on his own ground was dangerous, but it offered the only chance for complete victory. We do this right, we do it once, and we do it completely, he decided. No half measures. No second chances. Sapphire spent the remaining hours preparing her testimony. Her extraordinary memory would be tested under the most pressure she had ever faced. Stone would use every tool at his disposal to discredit her, but she had something he couldn't counter: the absolute truth, recalled with perfect precision. As Saturday night gave way to Sunday morning, the unlikely alliance prepared for a confrontation that would determine not just their fate, but the future of everyone Stone's conspiracy had harmed. The church bells began ringing at dawn, calling the community to witness what would become the most important service in Millbrook Township's history. The church filled beyond capacity as word spread about the special service. Families crowded into pews while others stood along the walls. Reverend Stone commanded attention from his elevated pulpit, his commanding presence radiating the moral authority he had cultivated over 8 years of spiritual leadership. Ruby sat in the front row, flanked by 2 of Murdoch's men posing as concerned deacons. Her hands were bound discreetly with rope disguised as prayer beads. Dark bruises on her face told the story of her captivity, but her spine remained straight with defiant dignity. Stone raised his arms for silence. Brothers and sisters, we gather today to witness the confession of sins that have plagued our community. Ruby Jenkins and her child have stolen money meant for our native neighbors and our children's education. Murmurs rippled through the congregation. Many had respected Ruby's dedication to teaching. Others whispered about the mysterious circumstances surrounding her disappearance. Today, truth will triumph over deception, Stone continued. Justice will prevail over corruption. The church doors opened with deliberate force. Mountain Caldwell strode down the center aisle, his imposing frame drawing every eye in the building. Behind him walked 9-year-old Sapphire Jenkins, her small figure radiating quiet determination that seemed to fill the entire space. Stone's practiced smile faltered for just a moment before reasserting itself. The child has come to confess alongside her mother. How fitting. Mountain stopped directly before the pulpit. "The only confession here will be yours, Stone," gasps echoed through the congregation. No one challenged Reverend Stone's authority so directly. His moral standing in the community approached sainthood. Stone's voice carried righteous indignation. "This man threatens a servant of God in his own house. Sheriff Murdoch, please escort these criminals out." Murdoch started forward, but Sapphire stepped into the center aisle. Her young voice carried surprising strength. "I have something to say to everyone here." Stone leaned forward with paternal condescension. "Children should not interrupt adult proceedings." "Then you should stop interrupting me." The response drew surprised chuckles from several congregation members. Stone's facade cracked slightly as he realized this child would not be intimidated by his authority. Sapphire turned to face the packed church. "Reverend Stone has been stealing money meant for treaty obligations and school funding. I can prove every accusation with exact details because I remember everything perfectly." Stone's laugh sounded forced. "The fantasies of a frightened child cannot be taken seriously." On September 7th, you met with railroad representatives at the abandoned mill. You accepted payment of $800 in exchange for territorial survey maps showing native treaty boundaries. The lead representative had a gold tooth and spoke with a Boston accent. Stone's confident expression wavered. The specific details carried weight that generic accusations lacked. Sapphire continued without pause. On September 14th, you forged territorial allocation documents in your study using official seals stolen from the county courthouse. You used brown ink mixed with coffee grounds to age the paper artificially. "I watched through your window when I came to return Mama's borrowed hymnal." Catherine Webb stood up from her pew. "I can confirm the timing. My charitable fund records show unexplained discrepancies on those exact dates." Deputy Santos entered from the side door, flanked by territorial officials who had been waiting outside. "These are serious allegations requiring investigation." Stone's composure began crumbling under the combined pressure. "You cannot believe the word of a child over 8 years of faithful service." Sapphire's memory unleashed its full power. "You visited our school on October 3rd at 2:15 in the afternoon. You examined Mama's funding records and asked specific questions about territorial allocation procedures. You said, and I quote exactly, that understanding proper financial channels would help you ensure community resources reached their intended recipients." She paused, letting the irony sink in. "You used Mama's own honesty to learn how to forge government documents convincingly. Every conversation she had with you about proper procedures became information you used to steal from the people you claimed to serve." Mountain pulled out documentation gathered during their investigation. "These are copies of the real territorial records. Every document Stone provided contradicts the official government allocations." The congregation buzzed with confused anger. Stone had baptized their children, married their young couples, and delivered funeral services for their departed. The suggestion that he was a criminal mastermind challenged everything they believed about moral authority. Stone made his final desperate play. "Even if these wild accusations contain truth, which they do not, I have dedicated my life to serving this community. My intentions have always been pure." Ruby spoke for the first time, her voice carrying despite her injuries. "Pure intentions don't justify stealing food from hungry children. Pure intentions don't excuse betraying federal treaties with Native communities." Sapphire stepped closer to the pulpit. "You told Sheriff Murdoch on October 20th that problems could be solved permanently by removing inconvenient witnesses. You specifically said that desert accidents happened frequently and rarely prompted investigation." The admission hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Stone had just been accused of conspiracy to commit murder by a 9-year-old girl whose perfect memory had become his worst nightmare. Sheriff Murdoch looked around the packed church and realized his position had become impossible. The community's faith in their spiritual leader was collapsing in real time. Stone's final defense revealed his true character. You would believe the lies of outsiders over the word of your own pastor. Deputy Santos stepped forward with territorial arrest warrants. Reverend Ezekiel Stone, you are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and theft of federal treaty obligations. The congregation watched in stunned silence as their spiritual leader was led away in chains, his moral authority destroyed by the perfect memory of a child who refused to let injustice triumph over truth. The territorial court proceedings moved swiftly once Sapphire's testimony provided the roadmap for investigators. Her perfect memory guided officials to hidden caches of forged documents, secret meeting locations, and buried evidence that Stone thought had been destroyed forever. Stone's arrest triggered a cascade of confessions from lesser conspirators. Sheriff Murdoch, facing overwhelming evidence of his participation, agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced charges. His detailed admissions filled in the remaining gaps in the prosecution's case. The railroad company executives initially denied knowledge of the illegal land acquisitions, but Sapphire's precise recollection of their conversations destroyed their defense. She recited exact quotes, described physical characteristics of the participants, and provided timeline details that corroborated other evidence perfectly. Within 6 weeks, the territorial court had recovered nearly $12,000 in stolen treaty funds. The money was immediately transferred to the affected native communities, providing winter supplies and medical care that had been denied for over 2 years. Ruby's recovery took longer than the legal proceedings. The physical injuries from her desert ordeal healed within a month, but the emotional trauma of betrayal by someone she had trusted ran deeper. Catherine Webb and other community members took turns caring for her while Sapphire threw herself into helping rebuild the system Stone had corrupted. The schoolhouse required complete reconstruction, both physically and administratively. The territorial government appointed an oversight committee to ensure proper financial procedures, but they quickly discovered that Sapphire's extraordinary memory made traditional auditing methods unnecessary. She could recite every transaction, every allocation, and every expenditure with perfect accuracy. Her recall extended beyond mere numbers to include the context of each decision, the reasoning behind each purchase, and the outcomes of each program. Mountain found himself appointed as temporary sheriff, while the territorial government searched for a permanent replacement. His reputation for integrity and his role in exposing the conspiracy made him the community's unanimous choice for law enforcement. The position offered something he had never expected to find: purpose beyond the hunt, respect earned through service rather than fear, a place where his skills could protect the innocent rather than merely punish the guilty. Deputy Santos accepted a promotion to territorial investigator, specializing in corruption cases involving abuse of religious or educational authority. Her experience with the Stone conspiracy provided valuable expertise for similar investigations across the region. 3 months after the church confrontation, Ruby returned to teaching with renewed determination. The new schoolhouse buzzed with activity as children from all backgrounds learned together under her guidance. The curriculum now included lessons about civic responsibility, government accountability, and the importance of questioning authority when justice was at stake. Sapphire became her mother's unofficial assistant, but her role extended far beyond typical student duties. The Territorial Oversight Committee appointed her as the official record keeper, recognizing that her perfect memory provided better documentation than any traditional bookkeeping system. The arrangement proved revolutionary. Government officials could visit at any time and receive instant, accurate reports on every aspect of school operations. Financial irregularities became impossible to hide. Educational outcomes improved dramatically when resources reached their intended destinations. Other communities began requesting similar oversight systems. Sapphire's reputation spread throughout the territory as the girl whose memory had exposed corruption and restored justice. Visitors came from distant towns to observe her techniques and learn from her example. The railroad company eventually completed their route through the valley, but under proper legal procedures that respected tribal sovereignty and compensated legitimate landowners fairly. The delay caused by the conspiracy's exposure cost them significantly more than honest dealing would have required. Mountain and Ruby developed a deep friendship based on shared commitment to justice and community service. Their partnership extended beyond professional cooperation as they worked together to rebuild trust in local institutions. Sapphire grew into her role as community guardian, using her extraordinary abilities to ensure transparency in all government dealings. Her presence at council meetings, financial reviews, and policy discussions became a powerful deterrent to potential corruption. The girl who had been left to die in the desert became the voice that kept her community honest. Her perfect memory served as a living archive of proper procedures, ethical standards, and moral accountability. Years later, when other territories faced similar corruption scandals, investigators would request Sapphire's assistance in unraveling complex conspiracies. Her combination of extraordinary recall and strategic thinking made her invaluable in cases where traditional evidence had been destroyed or hidden. Ruby's teaching philosophy evolved to emphasize the importance of individual responsibility in maintaining community integrity. Her students learned that education meant more than academic knowledge. It meant developing the courage to speak truth even when powerful people preferred silence. Mountain never returned to bounty hunting. His work as sheriff provided all the purpose and satisfaction he needed. The respect he earned through community service meant more than any reward money had ever offered. The schoolhouse became a symbol of resilience and renewal. Children who had been denied education due to stolen funding now thrived in properly equipped classrooms. The building itself stood as proof that corruption could be defeated when good people refused to accept injustice. On quiet evenings, Sapphire would sit with her mother and Mountain, reviewing the day's events and planning for tomorrow's challenges. Her extraordinary memory preserved not just facts and figures, but also the lessons learned from their unlikely journey from victims to protectors of truth. The community they had saved continued to flourish under honest leadership, transparent governance, and the watchful eye of a little girl whose perfect recall ensured that corruption could never again take root in the darkness of secrecy and unchecked authority. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.